Not to brag, but growing up academically, I was a pretty solid student. I took almost every single AP class that my high school offered. I'm talking about AP Geography, US History, Bio 1 and 2, Calculus 1 and 2. Honestly, pretty much anything I could fit into my schedule. If I remember correctly, I think we had a personal finance class, and then we also had a AP Statistics class, and that was the closest thing related to finance at our high school. In my opinion, it's a shame that U.S. public schooling doesn't focus on personal finance as much as we do STEM or science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. If I had to guess, it's probably because the teachers that we have also don't have their finance together or have the education to even teach the class themselves. So that being said, YouTube was essentially my professor to teach me everything I knew and had to know about finances. So as long as you're skeptical, YouTube is a great platform to teach yourself any type of information that you need. So today's video is about 3 things that I wish high school taught me about personal finances. So if you're like me and you felt underprepared from your high school and college when it came to personal finances, go ahead and like and subscribe to this video. It's going to push it out to a lot of people who probably need to hear this information. And if I had to guess, it's probably everybody watching this video, and this might end up being the most liked video in YouTube history. So the first thing I want to talk about is the distinction between cash flow and affordability. So many people believe if you have the cash or the credit to walk into a store, physically exchange money, or swipe your card and walk out with a product, that you can afford what you just bought. This is honestly one of the worst financial misunderstandings I have come across in my 24 years of being alive. If you can actively go exchange cash or credit for something, that means you can cash flow it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can afford it. The way I look at it is if you maximize your input into your long-term goals, assuming your long-term goals aren't anything outrageous, then you can afford anything that doesn't impede that maximum input. So I know that sounds complicated, but let's break that down into what I actually mean. Let's say you make $70,000, just so we can have easy numbers. So here in Georgia, that means you roughly take home $52,000 a year. Out of that $52,000, are you maxing out your retirement, your Roth or traditional IRA? Are you maxing out your employer match to the 401k? I know that's pre-tax. Do you have a 3 to 6 month emergency fund fully funded? And are you saving money on the side for the down payment on the house that you're trying to buy in 2 years? So those are examples of long-term goals, your retirement, your emergency fund, your future living situations that you need to maximize the input in. So out of that $52,000, are you maximizing where you need to be with the goals you set and the time frames that you set? So let's say you already have an emergency fund, but you want to buy a house in 2 years. So if you want to buy a $200,000 house, that means you need to get $40,000 in the bank. So if you're making $70,000 and you're maxing out everything else I mentioned, that means you have 2 years to get $40,000 in the bank. That roughly leaves you about $20,000 to live off of. Your rent and utilities and bills and living is probably going to cost you anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000 a year. Best case scenario, you have $10,000 of disposable income to use throughout that year without impeding on what your long-term goals are. $10,000 probably still sounds like a lot, but think about it like this. Can you afford $350 a month going to a car? If you only have $10,000 for the year to live off of, are you going to give essentially half of that up for a car? Do you think you can go out every weekend for drinks or go out to dinner as much as you want to if now you only have $5,000 left to live off for the year? So all I'm trying to say is you might think you have the money to pay for things. You might be able to cash flow it, but you're probably going to pass that amount and start impeding on your long-term goals, which means you can't afford it. So speaking about affordability, the second thing I think high school should have prepared us for significantly better, especially my generation, is college debt. Now, this is obviously a hot button topic right now, but there are so many kids, and I saw so many kids willing to pay anything to go to their dream college, right? I honestly, fortunately, wasn't one of those kids, so I didn't really sympathize with them, but I understood where they were coming from. For some background, I have 3 brothers. My oldest brother decided not to go to college and join the Air Force. My older brother went to Dartmouth, the Ivy League school, and my younger brother is currently in Cornell, and then I went to Wofford College. It's a small private school in Spartanburg, South Carolina. But now would be when I admit to everybody that I'm by far the dumbest in my family. I just want to make that clear. So all of us are successful in our own way. There's no doubt about that. But financially speaking, my brother who didn't go to college is by far financially the most successful. And I would put myself at the second most successful financially in my family. That's not to brag whatsoever. That's just me giving you an example on how your dream college or the better education isn't necessarily the main factor where you're going to be financially after college. Here's the rule that I gave myself when deciding what college to go to. I wasn't able to take loans out more than the conservative estimate of the starting salary of the field I wanted to go into. It sounds complicated, but I'll give you an example. Let's say you wanted to be an engineer. An engineer conservative estimate of the starting salary just by Google search is $50,000 to $54,000. So you have to pay for undergrad and graduate school with a maximum of $50,000 for both tuition and living expenses. Personally, I wanted to be a surgeon. So a starting salary for a general surgeon is typically $120,000. It's a bigger number, but keep in mind with $120,000, not only did you have to go to undergrad, you had to go to grad school. So I was trying to minimize as much as I spent in undergrad already, because then it would go into my grad school funds. And just so you guys know, for medical school, $120,000 is nothing. Now, the concept behind this rule is if you went into that field and you started making that conservative salary, right, the lowest possible estimate you had, you would technically be able to pay it off in 2 years, right? So with interest and taxes and everything, it might be a little bit more, or it might be a little bit less depending on how you live. But what this prevents you from doing is going out and getting $60,000 of college loans to go make $30,000 as a teacher. It forces you to think, oh, I need to go to a cheaper school, or if I want to go to the more expensive school, I better be going there for an education that's going to pay me enough to pay off these student loans in 2 years after graduation. So just to give you guys some personal numbers, I have $17,000 in student loans. 2 years after graduation will be the end of this year. So I guess 2.5 years, and that will all be paid off on track for that. But keep in mind, I've paid off roughly $30,000 of other debt. It's just to show you an example of if all you had was student loans, I would have been able to pay off $30,000 of debt because my entry-level salary for the field I ended up going into was $35,000. So the last topic I think high school should focus on, which they don't, is your retirement. There's absolutely no reason why I came out of both high school and college without clearly understanding what an IRA was and a 401k. And honestly, there are so many employers who take advantage of this by not including it in their benefits if their plan is just to turn and burn college graduates. So here, if you are in high school, listen to me, there will be a day where you want to stop working. That day is going to come quicker than you think. And if you want to see a sad person, go find somebody who has to go to work every day because they didn't save money to retire. But obviously that won't be you because you're listening to this video and you're going to turn your life around, right? You better. I'm just saying, you better. So in terms of retirement accounts, there's a lot of types, but there's two main types. Those two types are your IRA accounts or your 401k account. There are two types of IRAs. An IRA is an individual retirement account. You have traditional and you have Roth. A traditional account is money that you put in and it's tax deductible. Essentially it means you don't pay taxes on that money. That money, because you didn't pay taxes on it, will grow quicker than if you had paid taxes on that money because you're starting with a larger amount. However, when you pull that money out, you will have to pay taxes on it. A Roth IRA is essentially the opposite of that. A Roth IRA is when you put post-tax money into an account, and when you pull that money out when you're 60 or whatever, then that money is not taxed. A traditional grows more money at the end, but that money is taxed, whereas a Roth grows less money at the end, but that money isn't taxed because you already pay taxes on it when you put it in. So in practice, what that means is if you think you're going to be in a higher tax bracket when you retire, you want to put your money in a Roth. But if you think you're going to be in a lower tax bracket when you retire, you want to put your money into a traditional. A 401k is slightly different. The major advantage of a 401k is typically you have an employer match. What that means is, say you put $5,000 into your 401k. After a year, your employer might give you $5,000 to match that amount of money. Now you have $10,000 in a retirement account. you just immediately doubled your money. Each company matches differently than other companies. Your HR department is who you want to reach out to get the information of how your company matches, or if they even match at all. And when you pull money out of your 401k when you're retired, that money is taxed like regular income. So the less you pull out, the lower you're going to pay in taxes because you're going to be in a smaller tax bracket. And as you pull out more of that money, it's going to be taxed at the higher tax bracket rate. So typically what people do and what people suggest to do is to max out your 401k match because you're doubling that money automatically. So that's good. And depending on your tax bracket where you are now and where you think you will be, pick which IRA you want to do. And it might be as time goes on, you start slowly pulling money out of one IRA and you start investing it into the other IRA. It can get complicated, so you obviously want to use a trusted professional and seek advice from them. However, you should know the general basics and teach yourself how to do this. Those are the 3 things I wanted to talk about today. If you guys like this format, there's plenty of topics I can personally think of that high school didn't teach us that they should have taught us. So if you like this format, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. I'm Adrian Thompson, and remember, it might be hard now, but it doesn't always have to be. I'll see you guys in the next one.